Intro Chapter 0.0 Part 5. This is a really important segment. I'll try to be as clear as I possibly can. I'm also going to add this into your essays. I'll put a link to this in one of them, but think to refer back to this if possible if you're confused. You can always email me, of course, too. So we're going to get into studying art, and we might think, okay, well, why do we need to study art? But a lot of things are not representational, meaning they don't look like what they seem like they are. They're abstracted or non-objective. We're going to get into that a little more in detail. But art has a lot of different meanings. When we're looking at something and we're with a friend, say at a museum, and we're looking at a painting, and you say, well, I think it's green, and the friend says it's blue or something like that, that gives you one little clue into the possibility that we don't see all things in the same way. Then, if we look at something that's maybe mystical or religious, we're going to have a different feeling about it depending on our own personal or religious or cultural context. So even though you think it might be obvious or it might seem obvious at first, looking at a particular work of art, what it might be about or what the interpretation would be or your experience of that work, everybody has a different experience. There's some similar experiences. Sometimes things are the same. But you think about time of day. Think of you walked into a museum exhausted, or you just had a coffee and you're really ready to go and you really pay attention and you're really deeply engaged with the work. So every time you go and look at even the same work of art, you're going to have a different feeling about it. And I know from personal experience when I've gone into museums over the years, the Metropolitan in New York is one, LACMA in LA is one, but there's multiple museums where I didn't really understand that particular piece of work until I had a certain life experience. So a lot of things will change over time. Same thing is like, it's similar to how you taste food. Later in life, you may not like a lot of sugar, or you may not like a lot of salt in your food, or something like that. Or you develop a taste for fish. You couldn't stand fish before, something like that. So it's a way that your personal experience brings something to your viewing of the artwork. That's the point I'm trying to get across. So we all experience things differently, and there's new sensations and ideas, and we're always kind of coming from our own personal context, if that makes sense. And the more we know, then we start to look at things with a more knowing eye as well. And our eye gets developed. We can see more in a painting if we develop our eye. Okay? And I'll get into that a little bit more, hopefully, to make that clear. So, communication, as a message, the artwork's communicating things, but we don't have words to use here. So, in this way, we have content. We have subject matter, context, and the works arrangement of visual elements and principles. Please go back to this video if you're wondering how to break a piece down in elements and principles, and also in the book when it talks about formal analysis. That's what this is. E and P. Sometimes I say that in my comments to you. You did not use the E and P. And then formal analysis is another way to say this. And all of part 1, chapters 1.1 through 1.10 are all about the elements and principles. It breaks them down for you. The the first part we're going to get into, part 4, gets into subject matter and context. Part 2, which we do last, is about materials and process. Okay? So our subject matter might be visually apparent, it might not be. And there's also a title, right? So that might give us a clue there. And it's also told to us by critics and scholars that may have absorbed it. If we come back to our first images that we looked at in this chapter, the subject matter was all rivers and waterfalls, I guess you could say too. But the content and the purpose of each work was different. So you look at page 35 if you're looking for that. Sometimes you don't know what the subject matter is at all by looking at it. If we think about Louise Nevelson's, let's just speed all the way to the front. Sorry about that. So if we go to Louise Nevelson's piece, Do we automatically know that's about water or waterfall or fish? Maybe not. That is abstracted. It's not non-objective because it does want to describe a subject. It wants to describe vertical water. We know that from the title, right? But it is abstracted. We couldn't really read that as fish in water unless we took a little more time or even read a little more information about it. When we look at our Niagara Falls, that's pretty obvious that it's about Niagara Falls or water or a river, right? When we look at our Egyptian piece, we may not interpret this as a river down here on top of the snake. We know there's a boat there and a fish, so we have some clues, right? So there's different levels of information we're going to get with different works of art. So we're going to start to look at a few things that are very different. And, you know, sometimes the subject matter is told to us by the artist, but sometimes there's more to it than that. The context is actually beyond what the artist, I don't know, intended, I guess you could say. And sometimes it changes over time, like we view something differently. Right now in our culture, we're shifting our perception of a lot of artwork and a lot of ideas. There's an artist, Balthazar, I'm forgetting his name, but he does kind of pornographic pictures of young girls. And I think he may even still be living, but he is being, criticized. They're talking about taking him out of a museum. So a lot of things change over time about acceptability of subject matter and the context of which that piece is viewed. But that's controversy, which we just covered. I don't want to muddy the waters here. So we're going to break down into three main categories when we're looking at work. Representational. It depicts objects or people that we can recognize. We think back to our church painting of the Niagara Falls. We recognize it, right? If we think about the Egyptian piece, we also recognize that is also representational, but it is what we call stylized. That's not mentioned here, but it is not a realistic portrayal. It's stylized, but we still see people and we see gods, and if you want to think about that, you're able to see them, a boat, fish, that kind of thing. Representational is something that is depicting an object or a person that we recognize. Non-objective depicts subject matter that is unrecognizable. Now, this really gets into the abstract expressionist. This really has more to do with the 20th century. I don't want to give you an exact date because there's some pushback, there's back and forth, but probably 20s, 30s, maybe 40s into minimalism. That's non-objective. We're going to look at a minimalist piece in a moment. Abstraction, the artist alters an image that is from an easily recognizable subject. If we think of abstraction, the easiest thing to think about is Picasso. Cubism. That's a really easy one because it's still representational. Abstraction is representational, generally speaking. Non-objective is when you can't recognize anything at all, unrecognizable. So an abstract piece may have some realistic aspects to it. It's still a figure, but it's going to be highly distorted, right? So our first work that is highly representational, and there's really a spectrum here. This one is highly representational. It's almost realistic in the sense that the body looks like this. She's kneeling in a realistic way. We are looking at this. We agree that this is a male figure and a woman down below, and there's a chain. We understand that he's being freed in some way. That's about all we can get from this because there's no color and there's no other details telling us a time and a place exactly. All we know is these people are now forever free, right? That's what we know. But what the context of that is, well, I'm skipping ahead, so let's just stay on this. The idea here is that it's a recognizable woman, and the artist is creating realistic movement and expressions. So this is Edmonia Lewis. This is a woman who sculpted this out of marble in 1867. So what happened right before that, right? What happened right before that, and I'm going to skip ahead a little bit, is that, sorry, I'm missing my order. What happened right before that is that slavery ended, and Lincoln did his Emancipation Proclamation. And then we go back and we understand that that's the context of this piece. So that shifts things a bit for us, okay? So we know it's not just a random man and woman in any time in history. It's not a mythological portrayal, which it almost seems like it is, the way it's carved out. It looks like a Greek or Roman mythological sculpture. But this is specific to the end of slavery, 1867. Now we're going to get into a non-objective minimalist piece. So you may look at this and think, well, what is it? I don't care. Now, Eva Hesse is one of my very favorite artists. She's really super interesting. And unfortunately, all this latex and resin and so on that she used in all this work killed her. She got cancer and she was about to die. And this is one of the last pieces she made. And it had latex covering over the rope, and there's some string and wire. And the original position, I think, is preserved. There's photographs of the original way that she put this, and it falls apart every time they move it, unfortunately. But they put this up. So this says 1969-70. I don't know if this is right when this was shown. But they've re-shown this piece and it falls apart. Now it kind of looks like guts or viscera. Remember we talked about that? Intestines and so on. And that was kind of one of her thoughts of like, she's dying from cancer and she's trying to show this sense of her guts coming out and she's really upset, right? Well, it's a minimalist piece, so we don't get a lot of information about that idea. And we are using rope. She's using some rope, which is a manufactured material, and that's very typical of minimalists. So no, it's not about rope. No, it's not about manufacturing. It's not about hanging. It's about, the fact that she's dying of cancer and the idea that it's about her own personal experience, okay? So it's an unrecognizable subject matter. Now, it is subjective in that when you look at it, you don't know all that information necessarily. So you could have your own take on this. If you were to come and look at it, you might just look at the patterns of it. You might just look at what your last memory of rope is or your history with rope or something like that. So you're going to create your own interpretation. Now, that is the idea of the mid-century. That's very popular. We don't subscribe to that as much as we used to. It still happens in art today, but it's not the huge percentage that it used to be. This piece from Alan Hauser is abstracted, okay? There's some realistic elements. There's a baby sort of in a bundle, but we don't see the baby's body. We just sort of see a bump here, and it's very smooth, and the mother's face. We know it's a woman sort of kneeling or sitting and has the baby on her lap. We kind of get that idea, so we understand the subject. It is recognizable, but there's no arms, legs, and look at this hard line here. That wouldn't exist in any kind of clothing or drapery. So we look at this as an abstracted piece. We can identify the faces and the positions of the forms, but it contains a considerable degree of abstraction. Okay, so now we're going to get into context. Researching an artwork's context can help us understand it more fully. So a society, the economics and religion, the details of the patron, and the status of the artist. This piece, and this is a much better way to look at this than in the book. In the book, it's very dark. You can barely see it, I feel. I feel like the printing in the book is quite dark. Look at that little tiny moon there. It's just so yummy and gorgeous. So this time period, 1809-10, and we're going to look at William Turner also, a little bit contemporary to this, but this is a romantic painter. This is Romanticism. Don't be confused with romantic gestures like a rose. That's not exactly what it is. Romantic is with a capital R. And they, from page 37, romantic painters often infuse scenes of nature with spiritual meaning. Friedrich, that's our painter here, Caspar David Friedrich, was also a Lutheran who believed that one's connection with God, and I'm going on to page 38, survives even without the invention of churches and religious leaders. Knowing that Friedrich's works usually contained religious meaning, one can see the spiritual quality created by the lighting in the painting. So there's also some figures. We're going to a graveyard. Perhaps it's a procession. Sorry, my mouse isn't going. There's some figures down here. There's some crosses there. And there's a ruined cathedral there. So the idea that God is in nature, similar if you remember back to church in the very beginning, we looked at that waterfall, similar era time frame where we're thinking about nature in this romantic way and that God is in nature. Okay, so among these ruins, the church is still a religious space, and also the sky and the trees. Okay, I'm gonna do a separate one for that.